Oh, right. Nobody saw this one coming, huh? This has been a quiet one that's been simmering away and it's suddenly come to light. Have you realized, if you've been following the news and if you know what's been going on in America, and you know Trump likes to sign all these deals and what have you looked at the latest one that he signed? Well, if you have, then you might realize that Japan could well have pulled off the biggest power play in the global history of the car industry. It's extraordinary, and hardly anyone saw this coming. This is a stunning trade twist. Japan and the US, under President Trump, and his second term, of course, as you know, have struck a deal that could reshape the car landscape or the auto industry landscape entirely, and across the world. Actually, it will have an impact. It will have far-reaching impacts, and I will explain why. So what's happened here? We're talking about tariff slash. We're talking about billions of dollars that have been committed. We're seeing share prices soaring, and somehow Japan, that's been going slightly against the tide when it comes to EVs and what have you. They've been sort of, sticking with their whole philosophy of hybrids and traditional engines, in fact, and also potentially hydrogen. Well, they might have landed on their feet with this one, because that all kind of aligns perfectly with Trump's own sort of anti-EV tendencies, particularly now that he's fallen out big time with his bestest buddy, Elon Musk. And I think he returned his Tesla that he famously bought in the front gardens of the White House. But anyway, let's look at what we're talking about here. Is this a cool thing? Was this a smart play? It clearly was. But what does it mean for the long-term scenario for the car industry? And you know what? The world at large, including the environment. Well, let's get into all of that right after this.
A brown car guy.
Okay, this could be the deal that changes everything. Trump and Japan have agreed to a sweeping new trade deal. What's the headline takeaway? A flat 15% tariff on all Japanese vehicles and car parts entering the US. That is a big cut from what was previously 27.5% average rate before. And here's an even bigger thing. No import quotas. That's right, unlimited cars, no caps, a complete free-for-all for Japan to flood the US market with their cars. In return, what does Japan have to do in order to get this deal? Well, they have to put in $550 billion of investment for US-based supply chains, and especially in sectors such as semiconductors, AI, and of course the car industry. $550 billion is, frankly, a lot of money, there's no doubt about it, but in this context, on those terms, it's a little bit of a drop in the ocean. And where does the reflection of that come from? It comes from the market. When you look at the market and how market reacts to these things, well, they loved it. Certainly they loved it in terms of the Japanese car companies. Toyota's shares rocketed by 14%, Honda was up 11%, and even Mazda was up 17%. If you think about it, Mazda hasn't really come to the EV party. There's a new car coming out very, very soon. They're sort of coming into it slowly, but really they're stuck with their engines. They've even brought the Wankel engine back, the rotary engine back. And while this is happening, of course, South Korea, Hyundai, Kia, they're also looking at this deal and going, oh, maybe we could get a bit of that action as well. So there's more stuff possibly in the pipeline to come. Because as I've been saying, Japan never really got into the full EV thing, really, did they? I mean, Toyota, Honda, even Mazda, and others, Nissan, of course, was one of the forerunners. So they had the Leaf, and they've just launched a new Leaf. So they've been there. But if you look at these other guys, Toyota, Honda, Mazda, the other big players in Japan, they've been doubling down on hybrids. Toyota, of course, and Honda were the pioneers of hybrids. But they've also been heavily investing into hydrogen. They're still thinking about hydrogen, not only as hydrogen fuel cells, but also hydrogen to power traditional internal combustion engines, but adapted to run on hydrogen. But they have been cautiously looking at EVs. They have introduced a few cars. They're bringing them in, but they're still thinking about more efficient engines and hydrogen potentially as a longer term solution for them. Why is this the case? Well, look at the market. It's still overwhelmingly petrol and hybrid in Japan. EVs barely make 3% of sales in Japan. And compare that to here in the UK, for example, where this year we're hitting 22%. In Japan, still only 3% of sales are EVs. That's extraordinary. Now, if you look at that and you think about what's happening over there, and then you look at Trump's America, the new administration there, of course, has been aggressively slashing EV incentives. They've been rolling back mandates, and they've been pushing the whole idea of, like, let people drive whatever they want to drive, which, I tend to agree with. But on the other hand, you got to look at the bigger picture as well. Now, somehow, of course, all of this has managed to align with Japan's own instinct of sticking with internal combustion engines, but making them more efficient, using hybrid technology, and looking at alternatives such as hydrogen as well. So whilst a lot of the world has been looking at Japan going, yeah, you guys, you're going to be left behind, because everybody's on the EV bandwagon and you're not quite fully committed to it, and this amazing car industry that you've had for decades, you could well suffer. Well, actually, it's a case of, look who's laughing now, because Japan can literally flood the US market with hybrids and internal combustion engine cars at lower costs. They're positioned beautifully to take advantage of America's sort of resistance to EVs right now. Oh, hey, if you're enjoying this video, then please make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And also think about supporting independent journalism channels such as mine. You can do that by helping us out on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and also taking out a voluntary subscription right here on YouTube. In addition to that, I've got 3 books out at the moment which you can buy on Amazon or Kindle Unlimited. One is an all-action thriller, a novel about the war on cars. The second is a compilation of 13 amazing short stories that are written over 20 years that relate to cars and sci-fi and the human condition. And the third one, which I released this year, is all about doing what I do and how to do what I do. Check them all out. If you purchase one of those books, I will be greatly appreciative. So let's think about how all of this affects Europe. Let's compare this to Europe. European car makers, as of now, are still facing tariffs of up to 35% for exports to the US, thanks to Trump's Liberation Day tariff wave. And the EU is still scrambling to try and negotiate a better deal with them. But Europe hasn't been drifting towards EVs. Europe has been pouring a lot of money, investment, time, effort, and energy into that transition. Billions have been invested across not only the car companies, but also the infrastructure, supply chains, and everything to make that change over to EVs. And here they are kind of finding themselves at a disadvantage, theoretically, precisely because of that move. If you look at what the car industries have done, Volkswagen has committed something like 86 billion by 2025 into EVs. We know they have their whole ID range of vehicles, plus they got digital factories. They were looking at autonomous driving. There's 20 million euro earmarked for battery acquisition, and 20 billion euros, I should have said, earmarked for battery acquisition, and 50 billion euros earmarked for battery-centric investments. Stellantis, of course, the company that owns Fiat, Peugeot, Citroën, all the rest of it, Chrysler also in America. They have joined forces with other companies and invested 4.1 billion euros into a gigafactory, potentially, I think it's in Spain. And across the EU, car makers have been pouring something like over $250 billion? What's $250 billion? $250 billion into these electrification efforts. But the trouble is, there's been an issue with demand. They could supply, they moved over, they're creating these vehicles, but the demand hasn't really helped. And governments across Europe have actually made things even more difficult for them after legislating and making policies that have convinced these car companies or literally forced these car companies to pivot into EVs. They've then gone ahead and pulled or scaled back EV subsidies, especially like for here in the UK and in Germany. Sales in Germany actually dropped slightly for EVs last year. So it's having an impact. So this is a big problem for European car makers who went all in on EVs under government mandates, emission rules, and subsidy schemes. But now they are paying the price for these external trade factors, specifically the US trade tariffs of up to 35% that loom over their exports. Meanwhile, Japan's getting in through the back door for 15% and an unlimited supply. Now, the trouble is that Europe's EV pivot has become the victim of the supply side progress. It takes too long to build these gigafactories and what have you. A lot of them are still reliant on getting batteries from China. Demand side lag, so uneven subsidies. People are just not interested because the infrastructure isn't there for them and they don't see how it fits into their lifestyle. and the trade side shock, of course, which is the unexpected disadvantage due to things like this US-Japan deal that now has really put them at a disadvantage. So despite the fact that they have invested tens of billions of dollars and euros, if you like, into that transition, Europe now faces a really unfair situation. And not through lack of their efforts, or not through lack of their sort of decision to do the right thing, if you like, but simply because the rest of the world said, do the right thing, and then we're going to ignore you anyway. So this is not good for the legacy car companies in Europe, the brands that we know and love so well. And maybe you're thinking that, well, if it's good for Japan, bad for Europe, because of the whole EV thing, maybe it's also going to be bad for China. Well, that's interesting because China, of course, is the EV juggernaut right now. They've got tons of companies, even new companies, just popping up literally daily, producing more and more EVs, cranking out literally millions of them now, dominating the global EV market at staggering speed and scale. But the thing is, when you think about the fact that, yes, the world wanted EVs, China rose to it and said, right, we'll supply you with EVs, but look at the sheer carbon footprint of creating that number of EVs at that speed. It's absolutely staggering. It is literally massive, from the rare earth mining, transporting the batteries, building gigafactories, burning up energy to create these things, coal-powered factories where the power is actually coming from to charge the cars and to build these things, Yes, the cars are zero emission when you drive them, i.e. they have no tailpipe. Tailpipe emissions zero because they have no tailpipe, although they do, of course, still have particulate emissions from the brakes and the tires. But the building and supply of these cars is a massive, massive dent in terms of the carbon footprint to what happens to the planet. As I've always said, I think, if we had engaged in a natural transition to EVs, I think it would have been better. But this enforced, hurried transition to EVs, personally, it can't help but feel that maybe it's actually done more harm than good to the very thing that we're trying to help here, which is the planet's environment. And of course, with the fact that Trump won't allow these cars, China is not getting deals with America, no, not so far anyway, then what can China do with all of these millions of cars? They bought more ships. They've literally bought more ships. That's how many vehicles they want to export, that they've actually had to buy more ships in order to do that. Well, they've got the rest of the world to play with, haven't they? Here in the UK, for example, we don't have any tariffs with the Chinese, and that's why we're seeing an influx of so many brands coming into the UK market. But yes, I mean, they can dominate Asia, Africa, Middle East as well, which they are doing. So China actually is not too worried about this because China's gone, all right, well, if you want internal combustion engine or other solutions, you go to Japan. If you want EV, you come to us. Everybody else, screwed. But let's pull back and look at the bigger picture, the uncomfortable bit about, well, where does this leave the planet? Where does this leave us as humans? Where does this leave our future generations? I mean, yes, okay, hybrids do pollute less than pure internal combustion engines cars. They are a practical halfway house. A lot of people are moving into hybrids because they just make so much sense. In towns, especially with like plug-in hybrids, for example, which Japan isn't very big on, but a lot of European companies are doing plug-in hybrids, which around town literally operate like an EV. And it's only with that range anxiety thing that you're worried about, like if I have to go and see an ill relative in Birmingham or something and I suddenly have to set off on this 2-hour journey, can I do it? Well, in a plug-in hybrid you can, because it will just start using fuel, so it's fine. But meanwhile you'll drive around town, you'll barely use any fuel. So it's kind of the best of both worlds, but they do of course burn fuel, and they do emit CO2. EVs, of course, are cleaner at the tailpipe because there is no tailpipe. But then, as I've just said, we've got to look at the carbon footprint of what we're doing in order to create that number of EVs. What about hydrogen? Hydrogen, promising, still niche, expensive, ultimately still fossil fuel derived, and lots of complexities and difficulties about containment, storage, supply, distribution, etc., etc. But having said that, a lot of companies are looking at it for commercial purposes, for fleet purposes, and stuff like that, where it will probably make more sense. And if you break down the philosophies of what these nations or continents are following. Japan is playing the hybrid game, and they reckon that the long-term solution for now is that. China has, of course, bet everything on EVs. Europe is kind of caught between a rock and a hard place and is just flailing about with uncertainty, let's be honest. And America just changed lanes every time they have a new president come in, don't they? So it's a little bit of a nightmare scenario for the car industry as a whole, let's be absolutely honest. So is this a win or is this a setback? Well, in the short term, this is definitely a massive win for Japan. There's no doubt about it. So if you're a fan of JDM, you should be rejoicing, because the Japanese have just got a new leash of life, because they can go all in on this and they can produce some great cars. And maybe we'll see the return of some great Japanese coupes and sports cars coming soon, right? They get access, they get investment, they get momentum into international markets. In the longer term, it will raise big questions about what happened to our trajectory trying to get cleaner mobility, more sustainable mobility solutions for us and for the future. And that, of course, is a bit of an issue, because if we're going to stick with ICE and we're going to stick with hybrid ICE, even still ICE though, then it's difficult to really commit to that cleaner transport solution. And then fundamentally, this isn't even about what is the right thing to do. This is about, what economies are providing what kind of either subsidies or incentives, or on the other hand, punitive tariffs, in order to stop people from doing that, the right thing, supposedly, right? So it's really, really difficult. We are in a situation where we can see climate change physically, and we have set targets, and when we keep hesitating and changing our minds, changing lanes, then it feels harder and harder to get to that objective, to that target. Maybe we should just stop buying new cars and just keep running what we've got, and just let everything calm down. Maybe that's what we should do. And because especially for us, the drivers, car motorists, owners, we're like, well, what do we do? What do we buy? Where should you put your money? What should you invest in? What is the right solution going forward? Should you go EV? Should you stick with the ICE, or should you stick with a petrol or a diesel car? Should you go with a hybrid? Should you wait for an amazing new hydrogen solution? Honestly, I can't tell you, and I've been watching the car industry for 35 years. I will say that probably a plug-in hybrid is a pretty safe bet at the moment. But anyway, aside from that, there isn't really a clear answer. Anyway, over to you. You tell me what you think is going on, where you think this will all end up, what car do you think you should get next? I'll look forward to hearing your comments. Like I said, don't forget to hit like, share, subscribe on your way out, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Shout out time, guys. Thank you so much. Hey, if you enjoy my content, why not get involved? Buy me a coffee. You can do that at either of these links. Or if you're watching on YouTube, buy me a thanks or take out a membership. It all helps. It really does.